all those people who've come from Ukraine, is it wrong to take them? No. They are fleeing a war. Is it wrong to take all those overseas students? And well, no, what's one of our great exports is university education. Or those people who are coming into work in health and social care. No, we need them.
Let's discuss some of the morning's stories of the day with the former Conservative leader, as ever on a Tuesday, William Hague. Morning, William.
Good morning.
And Claire Fox, the director at the Academy of Ideas. She's just settling down. Morning, Claire.
Good morning.
Let's start with the BBC, shall we? The claims made against the unnamed BBC presenter have been dismissed as rubbish in a letter by the young person's lawyer. But the mother and stepfather stand by their allegations, which include the presenter spending £35,000, which funded the teenager's drug addiction. Hina Belitz is a partner in employment law at Excello and spoke to us about where the BBC's responsibility stands at the moment.
It is essential to investigate thoroughly and carefully. And I think the thing that's being missed or that people are becoming aware of is that social media is a runaway train. And what tends to happen is a lot of pressure is applied on coming to a conclusion or revealing information before a proper investigation has taken place.
David Mellor was Secretary of State for National Heritage, so was responsible for the BBC in the past. He's also a barrister. He thinks that's the only one way forward.
It's got to the point now where it's become a sort of national talking point. And there's no advantage, particularly to the either rightly condemnable presenter or someone who's been wickedly traduced. I can't understand what he thinks it's in his best interest to try and skulk on the sidelines when he should be out there defending his position. But we can't go on like this. The BBC has to realise that as a publicly funded body, higher standards are expected of it. And it's fannied around with this now since May.
No more fanning around, says David Mellor. But earlier we also spoke to the Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride, who made the point that this information should not be prematurely divulged in Parliament.
I think it's an individual decision of any member of Parliament as to whether they evoke parliamentary privilege and name somebody, but it is a privilege that should be used very rarely. And I think in this set of circumstances where we really don't know many of the facts, those will only emerge through time, but we don't know those facts. And until we do, I think under those circumstances, it will be ill-advised to do that.
So what should happen next? William, this is a bit of a mess now. There's the person at the centre of it saying through a lawyer it's rubbish, but the parents saying, well, we know what we've seen and we've got evidence of that to the son. The figure at the centre of it is unnamed at the BBC. If you were advising Tim Davie, William Hague, what would you advise him to do now?
Well, certainly it is, as you say, it's now very confusing, really. All the allegations that have been made have to be weighed against that letter last night from the lawyer of the young person saying they were rubbish. So we've no idea. All we know is we don't know, really, what the truth of things is. So my advice to Tim Davie would be, yes, you must be fair to all involved, but I would say you do need to speed up the transparency on this. Once something has become a national talking point, as David Mellor was just saying there, you really have to give out as much information as you possibly can without being unfair to anybody. So I would be saying, well, really explain. So you looked at this in May. There must be some reason why you didn't want to take it forward. Maybe there's some new evidence now you're looking at, but you really have to set all of that out and when you expect that to come to an end. Or you have to say, well, we are likely to take action, or this is the person involved. But really, it's not a tenable position, I think, to just go on with partial hearsay all the time, spreading around social media. So I would certainly encourage a fuller statement from the BBC of the whole position and how they're proceeding and why they've taken the decisions they've taken so far.
And should that include an inquiry? Do you think they should just need to say, we're just going to get someone out of the BBC and just say, here's all the facts of the case, tell us what in the best possible way we can, what has happened here?
Yeah, well, I don't know that. Again, we don't know enough to know there's something to inquire, for somebody else to inquire into. The police there's meant to have been a discussion between the BBC and the police in the last couple of days, although apparently this is not a matter of a police investigation at the moment. And one of the difficult things, by the way, for an organization like the BBC, and this is when somebody complains to them, but does not complain to the police, even though it is a potential, they're alleging a potentially criminal matter to the BBC, but they've not taken it to the police. That does put the BBC in a very awkward position. But I think the next step is for them to be as transparent as possible, to really lay out. Maybe they will do this at the Tim Davie is speaking shortly. To lay out as transparent as possible everything they have done and everything they are going to do and why they've taken the decisions they have. Then we would all be a bit further forward, rather than having to have rumors circulating on social media about many people who presumably are nothing whatsoever to do with it.
I think that's exactly right. Claire, what, is this a free speech issue, or is this a privacy issue? Is this a fairness issue? I mean, how do you get through this ethically?
I don't know what label I'd give it, but I think that, first of all, I think the people at the centre of this are actually the parents. And I think that's fair enough. The parents have done what they thought to be right. They did go to the BBC in May, and they didn't receive a satisfactory answer. And I don't think it necessarily matters whether it was a question of illegality. They were making an abuse of power point, weren't they? And as far as we can tell, I mean. I think the worrying bit for me is that at the moment it's just turning into, if you kind of look at commentators and, the infamous social media platforms, into a row between the Sun versus the BBC, which I don't think helps anyone. But it starts to be, the Sun have been irresponsible, they've behaved badly, versus, and they were only doing it to get at the BBC. I don't think that's helpful, but I'm worried that it will lead to, yet once more, a kind of an assault on media freedom and press freedom. I think it's perfectly reasonable for a newspaper to report a story like this, if they have the evidence and so on. I'm worried about the inquiry idea. I know what you mean, but, that always feels like kicking into the long grass.
Yeah.
I thought that William made a very fair point when he said there are certain things that the BBC could tell us, and they should tell us, just to get it all sorted. The naming of the individual, I would just urge that individual to come forward and out themselves, because it's not doing any good whatsoever.
Would you really? Because David Mellor made that point, but the argument against that is that if this turns out not to be true, that person will be forever associated with the story.
Yeah, but that person, as it happens, is probably going to forever be associated with the story, and the story that they are associated with is sordid and unpleasant. And if there's a different story, tell the story. Yeah. And if it's true, then you maybe have to fess up, right? So what I'm suggesting is that anonymity is not possible in these circumstances. We might all be speculating, but as you know, speculation lands on someone, it's coming out. There's no possibility that this can be kept quiet. So I think that we're in a situation where none of us want trial by media. None of us want to be having this conversation, because you think of all the things in the world that are more important, this isn't one of them. And yet it's cut through. And it's cut through because people feel that abuse of power by people in positions of authority is a more regular occurrence than it should be in public life. And secondly, that somehow there's a cover-up, a hiding of the story by the BBC. And then other people will say, this proves that tabloids are useless and appealing to the lowest common denominator. Not a view I share at all, but I've seen that said more and more. And as I say, it's going to turn into a media story soon. So the media ought to actually start dictating the narrative it wants to, rather than kind of going, I don't know what's happened, caught in the headlights, which is what the BBC seems to be.
We're going to move on now and talk about immigration. William, you have a column in the Times today. The immigration debate is naive and unsustainable. You write this on the same day that the think tank Policy Exchange finds that the government's total asylum-related spending is £3.5 billion for the year. Front page of the Times. Hotels given millions to reserve beds for migrants. Rooms for 5,000 left empty as buffer for arrivals. The debate, you're saying, is naive and unsustainable. So what should we be talking about when we talk about immigration, do you think, in 2023?
Well, what I say in the column is we've got to move on to talking about how we control immigration firmly. And people on the left of politics have got to get up to date with that, because the numbers of future migrants, illegal migrants, will be much, much greater than today unless control is firmly established. But we also have to talk about the opportunity of attracting talented people to this country because we need them. And we also have to talk about how we make sure we have a shared identity in the future, since, like it or not, there will be very large numbers of foreign-born people living in the United Kingdom who can add a lot to our economy and our national life. But we do need to promote, for them and for all of us, a shared identity. So I'm saying, get off the traditional positions here. We had a group of Conservative MPs last week published some proposals for how you could get immigration down, but it involved issuing no visas for care workers. Well, social care would be rapidly on its knees without that. So the right has to understand we can't do without migration, but the left they're voting this week to try and water down the government's immigration policy, the small boats policy. They have to understand we have to establish control as the foundation of everything else. So trying to move everybody on to a more finding some common ground that is realistic for the future.
I thought it was really interesting there that you said, like it or not, this is the future, this is what's going to happen. And the thing is that there are many people who don't like that. They do not like that. And you will see people who say, I find that my country is unrecognizable. These are, I don't know whether that's a minority or majority view, but I know that it is a view. Is that something that you come up against when you are, speaking to people, whoever those people might be? And are you able to persuade them of the point that you just made, that, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not, it is going to happen. It kind of almost has to happen as a economic imperative.
Yes, there are a lot of those people. And there are two answers to that, really. One is to go through, well, who is it then who's making up these high immigration figures? Because you've got all those people coming in from Hong Kong. Is it wrong to take them? Well, no, they will add a lot, actually, to this country. All those people who've come from Ukraine, is it wrong to take them? No, they are fleeing a war. Is it wrong to take all those overseas students? And well, no, what's one of our great exports is university education. All those people who are coming in to work in health and social care. No, we need them. So one is the logical argument, but the other is to say, look, the world is changing. I argue in my column, we're entering an age of migration, probably on the biggest scale the world has ever seen because of climate change and other factors. This is why we have to establish control. But having established control, you have to get used to the idea that it is an age of migration. So that's my answer to the people you're describing.
And does control include Rwanda-style plans or not?
Well, yeah, it does, unless somebody can come up with better alternatives. That's obviously a complex, costly, easily criticized policy, currently disputed in the courts. But any British government, unless British governments can do something like that to try to deter a lot of the small boat operations that we're seeing at the moment, then they will have to do something more drastic, whichever government it is, including breaching their international legal obligations. So I think we should be pretty understanding of governments trying to do something like that.
Okay. Claire, do you accept William's point there that, like it or not, the UK is going to look very different? We do need a degree of immigration. And how many people do you meet who like it and who don't like it?
So I really enjoyed William's column. I think that it is absolutely appropriate to say we need a more mature debate. But I think there's a danger with the like it or not position, that it sounds too fatalistic. I mean, it's like it or not, you're going to have it. And I think that cuts against the control issue. I think that for a lot of people, you can't have the discussion about what kind of migration policy you've got if you're told that you've got no choice about the migration policies you've got, which is constantly what happens. And one of my arguments in the Lords, and I'm not a great fan of the Rwanda policy, but when I listen to the majority of people in the House of Lords at the moment who are causing trouble for the Rwanda bill, they basically just refuse to accept there's any such thing as illegal migration in many ways. They just want to scupper the bill. And so you get this conflation between refugees and migration, which is unhelpful in terms of a mature discussion that William is calling for. And there's a real contempt, I think, for the democratic debate, which is to say it's illegal, it breaches international agreements, it's happening anyway, whether you like it or not. And immediately that gets people's backs up. And then just the only other thing is that obviously we are in the middle of a serious economic challenges for ordinary people. So when they hear that more money is being spent on hotels than on UK homelessness, obviously it's going to grate. When you are in a situation where the hotels, which are not luxurious at all, but have regular doctors visiting and you can't get to see your GP, what is it going to do? So I think the notion that William has outlaid, which I really agree with, which is I would like us to have a rational discussion about migration, but a number of things have to be resolved before that, and the tone has got to change from politicians.
So the campaign group Don't Divide Us is publishing a report today arguing that schools are being captured by the anti-racism industry. Claire, I think you've been involved with this group Don't Divide Us, because on the face of it, anti-racism industry sounds like people who are busy being against racism. That's not a terrible thing to be busy about.
It's also worth noting that Don't Divide Us are an anti-racist group, and that's what's interesting here. And I can take absolutely no credit for anything that they've brought out in this brilliant report. I simply was one of the original signatories. But I'm going to the launch today in Westminster. This is important because what's happened is that in the light of the George Floyd brutal killing in America, a lot of schools felt under pressure. We were actually in lockdown to change or look at their anti-racist policies and didn't feel equipped to. So they brought in all these activist organisations who kind of sold themselves as consultants. Look, we've seen this happen around the gender issue. It's a bit like the stonewalling of schools around racism, right? And they brought in with a very particular and ideological version of racism, which was white privilege, segregated classes, that you can't have colourblind policies and so on. And a lot of schools then didn't know what to do because they end up with these kind of slightly loopy but quite divisive policies, with children being humiliated if they're white for the sins of slavery, all sorts of terrible things happening. And then the schools can't really disentangle themselves because they're going to have to get rid of an anti-racist advisor and they're going to be fearful they'll be accused of racism. So Don't Divide Us have just done a cool, dispassionate look at the numbers of schools that have brought in these highly ideological, politicised organisations and the dangerous and divisive impact it's having on school kids. And I think discrediting anti-racism, which at least anti-racism is not just one thing. I mean, there's an argument. I'm not saying that critical race theory, for example, should be dismissed. I completely disagree with it, but it's perfectly valid to have that as one option. But to present it as factual, the only way that you can fight racism is being in a school context dangerous because it's then kids told this is what you've got to believe to be true.
William, is there an issue about outsourcing? Because Claire makes the point about what goes on with sex education and stuff around gender, and it seems to be the same thing, that schools seem to outsource difficult subjects to interest groups. And I mean, maybe there's no money for proper training teachers, maybe there's not enough teachers, but shouldn't schools have teachers who teach things rather than employing consultants to teach children?
Well, yes, in general, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Although, of course, new things come up, new issues come up on which guidance is needed, where you'd have to retrain the whole teaching population. So you can see why there's some outsourcing. I think this report deserves a fair hearing, actually. It overlaps with what we were talking about before, that we need to promote a shared identity in this country, in my view, rather than teach people they have separate identities. So I have some sympathy with what's being argued in this report, and I hope the government will look at it seriously.
We're going to end on Twiglets. This is because, in case you've not read Times 2 today, and why would you not, Nigella, don't even have to say Nigella Lawson anymore, just Nigella.
She's the Cher of the cooking world.
She certainly is. Has told Times 2 that she no longer organises fancy dinner parties, the kind that you would have seen in her cooking shows on the TV over the years. She just invites friends over. They can come in their pyjamas if they so wish. And she's even opted for serving Twiglets over elaborate entrees. So, William Hague, when was the last time you went to a fancy dinner party?
Well, I avoid them when I can, actually. But if Nigella's having, Nigella is one of my favorite women in the world. My wife teases me about that. I know her. I'm not a stalker. And if I don't care whether it's a fancy dinner party or whether we just have twiglets, but if she invites me, I will be around there.
Has she cooked for you then, William? Has she ever cooked a meal for you?
Has she cooked? Well, indirect. No. So I'm looking forward to this. No, I always seem to have been having a drink when I'm around Nigella Lawson. But she cooks it indirectly because most of the things that I would ever cook myself at home are from her books.
Oh.
Can you believe? So I feel like Nigella is a huge presence in my life.
I have so many questions. What is your?
Only to have a twiglet, but nevertheless, I would settle for a twiglet for a good chat with Nigella.
I'm sure you would. What is your signature dish from Nigella's cookbooks?
Oh, signature dish is a Thai seafood and pumpkin curry.
Lovely. And what was the catering? Were there many twiglets at George Osborne's wedding? What was the catering like there?
No, that was definitely the food was definitely towards the fancier end of that. And no, I didn't see a twiglet there, but we all had a great time. I must say it was a great fun weekend is what I can say about that.
Okay. Claire Fox, are you a fan of fancy dinner parties? And if someone invited you round and served you twiglets, would you feel disappointed?
Listen, if Nigella Lawson invited you round and you only got twiglets, then you'd be disappointed, wouldn't you? If I invited you to dinner and got twiglets, you'd be relieved because I can't cook. So I think it depends on the context. I think that it's the you can pop round in your pyjamas bit that was most offensive to me, not the food.
That.
Oh, yeah, very good. But I just think, there's a kind of set of people who kind of pop around in pyjamas to each other's houses. Who's got time? Life's too short. It kind of gave me a sense of a lifestyle that I've never aspired to, or indeed that most people couldn't dream of. But she's a great cook. I think, therefore, she should share her cooking when she invites people around. It just seems mean that she is noted for this and then she won't cook for you when you go.
Well, she's too busy cooking for, all her shows.
Well, that's true. It's a commercial enterprise.
Exactly. I think there's a bit of the lockdown in this for me. It feels like pre-lockdown, perhaps we were doing things that actually we've now realised we don't need to do anymore.
Would you let someone in your house in a pyjama? In a
pyjama?
Yeah, just a pyjama bottom.
I'm glad you said bottom and not top.
Depends who it is, really, isn't it? The whole thing is...
Would I? Yes, I probably would. Yeah, very relaxed. I think everything's so much more relaxed now.
Look, if it's your mate from next door, that's one thing. But if you're going to dinner, I don't think you should wear your pyjamas.
No.
And by the way, fancy dinner parties can be lovely and a real treat, but often they can feel like enforced jollity. Yeah. And if you don't like the food or you're with people, I mean, you can't say when you're invited to dinner and who else is coming, can you? And then you kind of turn up.
I think I would.
Oh, yeah. When then you kind of turn up, you think, oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. And mind you, when they see me walking in, they're going, oh, my God, it's that awful woman. And then you just kind of have to sit there for hours.
You're trapped.
So it can be...
No, I agree.
Can be awkward. I'd rather go to a rest. Exactly. Look, it's happened to me. There is a funny story, which is I sat through one dinner party and I could see that the person opposite was trying to remember who I was or whatever. And then right at the end, she blurted out, oh my God, I've just recognised your voice. You're that awful woman off the radio.
Oh, how rude.
Which, luckily, it was at the end of dinner, so it didn't cause the hostess too much embarrassment.
The tension throughout that meal, horrendous.
I guessed myself that when she worked out who I was, it wouldn't go well.
Oh, bless you.
Imagine saying that, though.
Well, we'll invite you back anytime, twiglets or none.
Even in your pyjamas.
Yeah, in your pyjamas.
William, do you wear pyjamas? I just like to
stop
ask
it.
questions.
This is too much.
Come on,
That's too
are you a
much.
pyjama man?
Refuse
William?
to answer that.
I'm not. No, I'd be in trouble trying to go around in my pajamas because I don't have any.
I do wear pyjamas. I love pyjamas, but there's a place for them. Your own home.
That's enough pyjamas.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
William doesn't have pyjamas.
Oh,
there we
that's
go.
a headline in the making.
Oh, yes, we have no pyjamas, right? Claire Fox and William Hague, thank you both very much. And if you like, I can't always promise that kind of top-level banter, but at 7 p.m. Monday to Thursday, John Pienaar goes through the big stories of the day with two guests.